June 6, 1944, Juro 15. Strong point WN62, Omaha Beach. Gefreiter Heinrich Sevelo wiped the barrel of his MG-42 inside a concrete bunker, staring out at the channel. In his pocket was a letter from his girl in Metzingen, promising to wait until the war ended in victory. He had answered with certainty. The invasion would die on this beach. They would push the enemy back into the sea within hours. He had written those lines 3 days after Field Marshal Rommel inspected their sector. The Desert Fox peered through Sevelo's firing slit, traced the intersecting arcs of fire, and nodded, satisfied. "When they come," Rommel said, "this shore will become their graveyard." Through the embrasure, Sevelo saw only quiet darkness over the water. The night felt calm, almost gentle. 12 hours later, the same young man would be found sobbing in his bunker, surrounded by 13,500 empty cases, his gun barrel heat-warped, staring at an invasion so vast his mind refused to accept what his eyes saw. Though Sevelo later claimed 1,000, 2,000 casualties, historians judge that impossible, given that total U.S. losses at Omaha from all causes were about 2,400. The math of Germany's defeat would be written not in staff studies or intel briefs, but in the stunned memories of men watching the largest amphibious assault in history from the wrong side of the gun sight. The Atlantic Wall ran 2,400 miles from Norway to Spain, advertised by German propaganda as the most formidable defense ever built. Along Normandy, 58 divisions of mixed quality held positions poured from 17 million cubic meters of concrete and 1.2 million tons of steel. Hitler called it impregnable. Omaha's preparations alone seemed to justify his confidence. The U.S. Army Center of Military History lists 8 concrete bunkers, 35 pillboxes, 4 artillery sites, 18 anti-tank positions, 45 rocket posts, 85 MG nests, and 6 mortar pits. The beach itself had been engineered into a killing ground. 3,700 obstacles, Belgian gates, Czech hedgehogs, timber stakes, many topped with teller mines. Behind the sands lay 6.5 million mines, though Rommel had wanted 60 million. Colonel Ernst Goth of the 916th Grenadier Regiment near Bayeux ran the numbers for his sector. His 4 batteries could, in theory, throw 120 rounds per minute into the landing zones. Combined with neighboring guns, German firepower could mass brutally on any attempt to come ashore. But those figures assumed bottomless ammunition, and that flaw would prove fatal. June 5th brought weather that Luftwaffe forecaster Walter Stuber in Paris deemed impossible for an invasion. Winds 20-25 knots, seas to 6 feet, cloud base at 500 feet. Using U-boat and station data, he told high command conditions would stay bad for at least 2 weeks. On that forecast, many senior officers left their posts. Rommel himself departed for Germany on June 5th to mark his wife's birthday, carrying gray suede shoes bought in Paris. General Friedrich Dollmann of 7th Army called his division commanders to war games in Rennes. Even the naval patrols that usually swept the channel were canceled for rough seas. That meteorological confidence was the first German misread. Unknown to Stuber, the Allies had Greenland stations and Atlantic weather flights that spotted a brief break, about 36 hours, which Group Captain James Stagg flagged and Eisenhower seized. At 23:15 on June 5th, Norman coast radar sites began to see unusual returns. Freya and Würzburg sets showed massive formations approaching from the north. Operators had seen such ghosts before, decoy raids meant to keep Germany on edge. By 0030 on June 6th, reports arrived that broke assumptions. Fallschirmjäger were landing across Normandy, but nothing added up. Some reported drops to the east, others to the west. Some said British, others American. Dummy paratroopers with firecrackers, Operations Titanic and Rupert, deepened the fog. Major Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment of 21st Panzer Division, grasped the danger early. Woken by news of drops near his lines, he asked permission to strike immediately. The division replied, "Hold until the situation is clear." Von Luck later wrote in Panzer Commander, "I knew we were lost." The paratroopers were fixing the flanks for a landing. Every minute of waiting let them dig in, and we sat frozen by our own command system. June 6th, 5:30. As first gray light lifted over the channel, forward German observers began reporting sights no training had prepared them for. Werner Pluskat, his exact presence disputed by some, including Teverloh, has been credited in some accounts among the first to report the armada. What is certain is this: across Normandy, from horizon to horizon, men saw the sea covered with ships, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. Every type, from great battleships to tiny landing craft, spread across the channel like a slate-gray carpet. Official Allied records list 6,000 to 139 vessels, 1,213 warships, 4,126 landing craft, 736 auxiliaries, 864 merchantmen. It was the largest armada ever assembled. To defenders raised on propaganda about Allied weakness and division, the sight was shattering. Bernhard Furking, an artillery officer at WN-62 who would die later that day, told his crew they were watching the whole world arrive at their doorstep. At 0535, the naval barrage began. Nothing in German experience, neither the Eastern Front nor the worst RAF raids, prepared them for what followed. The battleship USS Texas alone hurled 255 14-inch shells at Pointe du Hoc in 34 minutes, according to naval history and Heritage Command logs. HMS Warspite, first to fire on D-Day around 0500, would send over 300 15-inch shells in the first 2 days, including 96 fired on June 9th. The cumulative bombardment exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had faced. German veterans' accounts in the Federal Archives describe concrete casemates cracking under the gunfire. Men were buried, dug out, and buried again as shells kept falling. The psychological damage matched the physical collapse. Fortifications they trusted absolutely crumbled like sand. While the barrage raked the shore, the Luftwaffe's reply exposed the truth of Germany's position. Oberst Joseph Pips Priller of JG-26 was ordered to attack with his entire wing. His answer in the war diary was bitterly simple. "What entire wing? I have 2 aircraft. On D-Day, the Luftwaffe managed 319 sorties against 14,674 Allied per U.S. Navy only figures." Priller and his wingman, Unteroffizier Heinz Wodarczyk, made the only Luftwaffe pass at the beaches that morning, one strafing run over Sword and FW-198s, then bolted from overwhelming Allied cover. 2 fighters slashing once at an armada of thousands became the symbol of German impotence. At 0630, the first assault waves touched the sand. German crews, battered but alive, manned their weapons and opened fire. What followed shocked even hardened men. Guns roared. Heinrich Sevelow at WN-62 began firing at 00635. His position, one of the few not wrecked, swept perfect fields of fire across Omaha. In his 2005 memoir, WN-62, Erinnerungen an Omaha Beach, he wrote that he shot 13,500 rounds over 9 hours. While Sevelow claimed heavy losses, Historians note his nest, deadly as it was only one factor in Omaha's toll, and exact numbers cannot be proved. What is certain is that his MG-42, 1,200 rounds per minute in short bursts, added to the slaughter later called Bloody Omaha. German troops started to suffer what historians would label material shock, the mind breaking under overwhelming force. However many Americans, British, or Canadians went down, more came. Each wrecked landing craft was followed by 3 more. Each silenced MG was smothered by naval gunfire that felt endless. By midday, reports of critical ammunition shortages spread along the line. Defense tables had assumed a limited assault. No one had planned for this scale. Wehrmacht supply ledgers show posts that were stocked for 3 days burned through their allotments in hours. Artillery, the backbone, faced the same collapse. Hoarded shells vanished in the intensity. Bringing up reserve stocks failed. Every road lived under constant fighter-bomber attack. The contrast with Allied fire was brutal. American destroyers would dump hundreds of shells on single targets, while German batteries were rationed to 4 rounds per gun per day by that afternoon. The armored reserve, the hammer Rommel insisted must crush any landing on the shore, sat frozen through the critical morning. 21st Panzer Division, the only armor close by, did not get attack orders until 1,000, 4 hours after the landings began. When 21st Panzer finally moved, around 16 to 19-20 hours, they pushed between British airborne drop zones toward the coast. Division logs say they reached the shore between Lyon-sur-Mer and Luc-sur-Mer near 1900, the only German armor to touch the water on D-Day. Then, at 2100, Operation Mallard arrived, roughly 250 gliders, bringing fresh troops for the British 6th Airborne. Reading that sky train as a threat to their flanks, they pulled back. The division lost 54 tanks and armored vehicles that day, about a quarter of its strength, and the counterattack ran into Allied specials they had never faced. Hobart's funnies, flail tanks for mines, flamethrowers, bridge layers, felt like a different age of war entirely. All through D-Day, German formations faced a scale of airborne power they had never seen, large forces deep behind their lines. The British 6th Airborne and the U.S. 2nd and 101st Airborne Divisions produced chaos far beyond their numbers. Oberst Friedrich von der Heydter, Germany's most seasoned paratroop leader, serving with 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, was in Normandy for the invasion. His professional verdict, preserved in post-war interviews, was brutal. The Allied airborne was everything ours was not: massive, alive, coordinated, and well-supplied. We dropped battalions. They dropped divisions. We were fed by single planes. They had endless streams of transports and gliders. The mental effect of paratroopers appearing everywhere froze reactions. Units refused to budge, fearing ambush. Others shot at shadows, sometimes their own men. Confusion multiplied every other problem. As June 6th wore on, German command and control unraveled. Allied aircraft cut lines methodically. French resistance, cued by BBC code phrases, severed cables, and wrecked relay posts. Allied jammers smothered radios. General Lieutenant Max Pemsel, 7th Army Chief of Staff at Le Mans, tried to direct the fight. His diary shows growing fury as links to the front went dark. By noon, whole divisions had vanished from the net. Field officers chose on their own, blind to the larger picture. Nightfall found the survivors taking stock. The impregnable Atlantic wall had breaks all along it. The Luftwaffe had effectively disappeared over Normandy. At sea, the Kriegsmarine managed to sink a single destroyer, USS Corrie, and lost 15 E-boats and many smaller craft. General Lieutenant Wilhelm Richter, commander of 716th Division, which endured the British blow, sent his report to 7th Army. Combat strength 35%. All coastal strongpoints gone. Artillery 90% destroyed. Enemy advancing inland. The number spoke of failure despite personal bravery. In one day, the losses rivaled a full battle, and the Allies kept landing new troops as if D-Day were only the opening act, not the climax. Through the night of June 6-7, German units tried to regroup and strike back. Those efforts exposed Allied superiority in full. Every movement drew eyes, found by radar, lit by flares, smashed by guns ashore or from ships. Hans von Lucke's Panzer Grenadiers, finally freed to counterattack, pushed toward Sword in darkness. In his memoir, he recalls being lit up at once by parachute flares and pounded by destroyers offshore. It was like daylight. Every truck, every man, visible. Shells from the sea landed with perfect aim. We lost half our strength without seeing a single enemy soldier. Meanwhile, the Allied buildup did not pause. Mulberry artificial harbors were already taking shape. Supply ships lay in tidy rows at anchor. The landing was turning into a fixed base. German reinforcements trying to reach Normandy hit total interdiction. Roads, rails, bridges, everything lay under constant attack. Wehrmacht transport logs show units that should have arrived in a day took as long as 2 weeks. 2nd SS Panzer Das Reich, near Toulouse, needed 17 days to reach the front, a trip that should have been 3. They arrived down 30% of vehicles from airstrikes without firing a shot at ground troops. The message was crushing. If you cannot even reach the fight intact, how can you change it? Allied logistics, by contrast, ran like a machine. LSTs, landing ship, tank, unloaded whole armored regiments in hours. Within days, the beaches saw 15,000 tons a day come ashore, more than the entire German force in Normandy used in a week. By June 12th, German formations near collapse mentally. Losses reached 26,000 killed, wounded, or missing. About 2 divisions gone. Replacements were meager. Allied numbers grew hour by hour. Carentan fell on June 12th, linking Utah and Omaha. The elite 6th Fallschirmjäger, who had never broken before, pulled back in disorder. Their commander, Friedrich von der Heide, told Heyer, "My regiment no longer exists as a combat unit. The survivors are psychologically broken." On June 30th, SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann scored one of the rare German tactical wins in Normandy. British records credit him with destroying 13 to 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 13-15 carriers at Villers-Bocage in roughly 15 minutes. German media seized on it as proof that German arms could still triumph. But even that win showed the deeper truth. Wittmann's Tiger was disabled and hard to replace. British losses were made good within hours. Individual brilliance could not beat industrial arithmetic. Wittmann himself, 138 confirmed tank kills across fronts, died on August 8th when his Tiger was destroyed, whether by British gunner Joe Ekins of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry or by Canadian fire remains argued. The fall of Cherbourg on June 26th dealt another blow. Fortified over 4 years, garrisoned by $21,000, expected to hold for months, it fell after 5 days of hard fighting. General Lieutenant Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben had vowed to defend to the last round. He surrendered on the 26th. In interrogation, he said resistance lost meaning against an enemy with bottomless resources, a refrain heard throughout German accounts of Normandy. Operation Cobra on July 25th delivered the breaker. Official USAF figures list now to 503 heavy bombers, 380 mediums, and 550 fighter bombers, dropping over 400 tons in a belt only 7,000 yards wide and 2,500 deep. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein of Panzerlehr radioed Army Group B, "My division is annihilated. The survivors are shattered. They are no longer soldiers, only broken men." The bombing was so fierce it killed Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer to die in the European theater, observing from what was thought safe. If U.S. generals were not safe from their own firepower, what chance did German riflemen have? The Falaise Pocket, August 12, 21, became the German graveyard. Allied intelligence, later matched by German records, counted about 10,000 dead and 50,000 captured, more than 300 tanks and AFVs wrecked, plus some 2,500 other vehicles. Men trying to escape told of roads carpeted with dead horses and burning columns. Fighter bombers hit in waves every 20 minutes. Artillery never stopped. The methodical destruction was so complete that many simply surrendered, choosing captivity over certain death. The campaign's final ledger is stark. German losses from June 6 to August 31st, roughly 320,000 casualties, 30,000 killed, 80,000 wounded, 10,000 missing or taken. About 2,300 tanks destroyed, virtually all armor in France. 2,127 aircraft down, Allied losses, 200,072 casualties, with replacements outpacing losses daily. Around 4,000 tanks lost, replaced within weeks. 4,001 aircraft from a fleet over 13,000. The disparity exposed the core reality. Germany was fighting an attritional war it could never win against an opponent with near-limitless reserves. Professional German officers said it most clearly. General der Panzertruppen, Heinrich Eberbach, who took over in Normandy after Rommel was wounded, reported to OKW on August 1st, the enemy's material edge is at least 20-1 in artillery, 10-1 in tanks, and absolute in the air. He replaces losses in days. We replace nothing. General Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff, wrote in 1949, "Normandy proved courage cannot defeat industrial supremacy. We faced an enemy who had mechanized not just war, but victory itself. And Rommel left the strongest record." In his last report to Hitler on July 15th, 2 days before Allied aircraft badly wounded him, he wrote, "The troops fight heroically everywhere, but the unequal struggle nears its end. The enemy's overwhelming superiority in men and material is telling. I must beg you to draw the necessary conclusions without delay. In military words, total defeat." Germany's most famed field marshal told Hitler the war was lost. Normandy showed that World War II had become a production war. German soldiers saw American output beyond imagination. Ford's Willow Run plant at peak turned out one B-24 every 63 minutes. U.S. factories built 96,000 aircraft in 1944. Allied ammunition use in a day could exceed Germany's monthly production. A single U.S. division burned more supplies daily than a whole German corps. Hans von Luck, looking back, put it plainly. Modern war is not tactics or bravery, but production. The Americans converted war into an industrial process. They manufactured victory on assembly lines. Survivors of Normandy were changed. They watched their doctrines about combat, race, destiny collapse in contact with reality. Heinrich Severloh, the MG-42 gunner of WN-62, spent his life haunted by D-Day. In his 2005 memoir, he recalled meeting American veterans. "We realized we were young men hurled into an industrial slaughterhouse. My 13-500 rounds meant nothing against an enemy with endless replacements. Friedrich von der Heydter, the paratroop commander, became a professor of international law. He wrote that Normandy ended the age of warrior heroes. War had become a question of capacity, and we had challenged the greatest industrial power on earth with horses and old dreams. From the German side, D-Day was more than a battlefield loss. It was an ideological and psychological collapse. Men who had conquered much of Europe discovered their beliefs about their foes, their cause, and their abilities were catastrophically wrong. They expected weak, divided democracies. They found an alliance that made war into a highly efficient industrial routine. They saw the arsenal of democracy at work: ships, planes, tanks, supplies in volumes beyond German grasp. The defenders learned that in modern war, victory is decided in factories, not just on beaches, by productive societies, not the boldest platoon. They saw the Western Allies turn conflict into math, where output numbers beat tactical brilliance. Severlo began June 6th. Sure the landing would be crushed in hours, he ended it amid mountains of brass, watching wave after wave take the shore his gun was meant to deny. His story mirrors the larger German fate in Normandy. Tactical moments drowned by strategic impossibility. Those sands became revelation as well as battleground. German soldiers glimpsed the future of war, and it belonged to those who could build more and use it better. They brought courage, skill, and will. The Allies brought unending materiel. They fired until barrels warped, fought until ammunition was gone, and watched the Allies answer by bringing more of everything. The arithmetic of modern war made courage irrelevant. The men who faced D-Day began as warriors of the Third Reich and ended as witnesses to the arsenal of democracy in terrifying full view. Their defeat was not merely military, but total, a proof that a creed of racial mastery and military dominance shattered on the fact of Allied industrial supremacy. The invasion they vowed to cast back into the sea swept them away instead, carrying off the last illusions of German triumph, the last illusions of German victory, the last